What Enoch claimed existed beyond Eden changes everything. His ancient visions describe a world of guarded boundaries, terrible prisons, living mountains, and places no human being was meant to enter. Genesis tells what happened inside Eden and why Adam and Eve were driven out, but it gives only brief details about the vast world beyond the garden. The writings linked to Enoch take readers into that silence and describe a creation far stranger, more ordered, and more dangerous than many imagine. And the most important detail is not the watchers, the giants, or even the places of fire. It is where Enoch finally places Eden within this larger world. Because once that detail appears, the guarded gate in Genesis begins to look very different. Most people picture the story the same way. Adam and Eve stand inside a perfect garden. They disobey God. They are sent away. Then they step into the ordinary world, a wilderness, an empty landscape, a hard place, but still a familiar earth. Yet Genesis never actually calls the world outside Eden empty. The text says God planted a garden in Eden. A river flowed from Eden and divided into 4 branches. After Adam and Eve sinned, God sent the man from the garden to work the ground from which he had been taken. Then comes one of the most powerful images in Genesis, cherubim, and a flaming sword turning every direction. Their purpose is stated clearly, to guard the way to the tree of life. The Bible does not say these guardians were protecting Adam and Eve from whatever lived outside. They were guarding the way back in. That difference matters. Because Eden was not simply a pretty home that humanity lost. It held access to something humanity could no longer take: life. Genesis describes a real boundary. On one side stood fallen humanity. On the other stood the tree of life. And between them stood heavenly guardians. But centuries later, an ancient work associated with the mysterious Enoch would describe other boundaries, other guarded places, other regions of creation with very specific purposes. And suddenly, Eden would no longer appear as the only strange place on the map. The biblical Enoch barely speaks. Genesis says he lived 365 years. It says he walked with God. Then it says he was no more, because God took him. That is all. There is no death scene, no burial, no long final speech. Enoch simply disappears from the Genesis account. Hebrews later remembers him as a man taken so that he did not see death. Jude also names Enoch in a passage about coming judgment. But an ancient collection now called First Enoch gives the figure a much larger role. In these writings, Enoch becomes a witness, a traveler, a scribe, a man shown places ordinary human eyes could not see. This does not mean Genesis secretly contains every detail found in First Enoch. And First Enoch is not part of the biblical canon for most Jewish and Christian traditions. That distinction must remain clear. But these writings are ancient. Aramaic fragments of Enochic works were preserved among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran. The official Dead Sea Scrolls archive identifies multiple Enoch manuscripts from Cave 4, and one featured fragment is dated by the archive to roughly 150 to 50 BC. So ancient readers were asking questions about Enoch long before the modern age. And one question seems to hang over his journeys. What does God's creation look like when a man is allowed to see beyond normal human limits? The answer begins with rebellion. The first major section of First Enoch expands a story familiar from Genesis chapter 6. Genesis says the sons of God saw the daughters of men. It says they took wives. It mentions the Nephilim. Then the biblical story moves quickly toward the growing wickedness of humanity and the flood. First Enoch slows the event down. It calls the rebellious heavenly beings watchers. According to its story, a group of them descend and bind themselves to their plan. They take human wives. But the account goes further. They reveal knowledge, weapons, enchantments, signs connected with the heavens. things the Enochic writer believed were being placed into human hands in a corrupt way. The result is not progress, it is disorder. Violence spreads, blood is shed, the earth is filled with corruption. The Israel Antiquities Authority's description of a Qumran Enoch fragment likewise identifies the tradition as a heavenly revolt in which fallen angels descend, cohabit with women, and reveal secret knowledge to humanity, connecting the story with Genesis 6:1-4. But here is where the original question becomes dangerous. Were these watchers already waiting beyond Eden when Adam and Eve were expelled? First Enoch does not plainly say that. In the Watcher account, the rebellion takes place later, in the days connected with Jared, that is, generations after Adam. So Enoch's claim is not that Adam walked out of Eden and immediately found Mount Hermon covered with fallen angels. The text gives no such scene. The real mystery is more subtle. Because when Enoch is taken on his journeys, he sees that the human world is only one part of a much larger created order. And the first places he describes are not cities, they are boundaries. Enoch is shown regions of fire, storehouses connected with the winds, great darkness, waters, mountains, a place where, in the old translation, no flesh walks. Then he sees something terrifying: stars. But these are not described as ordinary points of light viewed from the ground. They are pictured like burning beings. Some are bound, some are connected with judgment. Enoch asks why. The answer he receives is rebellion. The beings he sees are held for transgression. The ancient writer is presenting a universe with moral order. A place has been prepared for the obedient. A place has been prepared for judgment. Certain boundaries cannot be crossed without consequence. That pattern should sound familiar, because Genesis also presents a boundary. Eden. Humanity crosses God's command. Humanity is expelled. The return is guarded. In First Enoch, rebellious heavenly beings also abandon the order assigned to them. They cross a boundary. They corrupt what follows. Then they face confinement and judgment. The two stories are not identical, but the pattern is hard to miss. God establishes order. Created beings reject that order. A forbidden line is crossed, and exile follows. Now Enoch is taken even farther. He sees mountains unlike ordinary mountains. One place contains 7 mountains. The descriptions are filled with precious stone, fire, fragrance, and trees. At the center stands a mountain described with language of greatness and divine presence. Enoch asks about it. Again, the answer connects a place with a purpose. This is not random geography. In the world of First Enoch, locations mean something. Mountains can mark holiness. Valleys can hold judgment. Abysses can imprison rebellious beings. The ends of the earth can contain the hidden workings of creation. The ancient writer looks at the world and sees structure everywhere. And then Enoch reaches a tree. Not just any tree. Its smell is described as beyond the others. Its leaves and wood are praised. Enoch wants to know what it is. The angel Michael answers. The tree is connected with the righteous and with life. It is reserved until a future time of judgment and restoration. The language naturally calls to mind a theme from Genesis, the tree of life. But Enoch is not finished, because a few chapters later his journey moves toward the east. There he describes mountains. He crosses beyond them. He sees trees, and among them is a tree linked with knowledge. Then the text identifies the place, the Garden of Righteousness. In the old textual tradition of First Enoch, this eastern garden is associated with the place where the first father and mother received knowledge. The Enochic journey through the earth also describes great rivers, darkness, mountains, and locations beyond ordinary human travel before reaching its sacred regions. Adam, Eve, Eden. Enoch's world has finally returned to Genesis. But notice what has happened. The garden appears within a journey through a much larger sacred geography. Enoch has seen places of fire, places of confinement, cosmic storehouses, mountains tied to divine purposes, regions associated with the dead, places prepared for judgment. Then, among these extraordinary places, he is shown the garden. That changes the picture. Not because Enoch proves where Eden can be found on a modern map. It does not. And not because the text reveals lost human kingdoms outside the garden. It does not say that either. The change is much deeper. For the writer of 1st Enoch, Eden belongs to the same ordered creation in which heaven, earth, judgment, life, and spiritual rebellion are all connected. Eden is not treated as an isolated fairy tale island. It is part of sacred geography, a place with a purpose, a boundary, a lost point of access. And that raises a new question. Why would the Enochic writer care so much about boundaries? The answer may be hiding inside the Watcher's story. The Watcher's sin is not simply that they are frightening. Their rebellion involves leaving their proper role. They descend. They take what is not given to them. They reveal what the text treats as forbidden knowledge. They cross limits. Humanity does something similar in Eden. The serpent points to the forbidden tree. The woman sees that the tree is desirable for gaining wisdom. The fruit is taken. The man eats. Their eyes are opened, but they lose the garden. Again, the details differ. Yet both stories turn on a terrible exchange. Created beings reach beyond a God-given boundary. They gain something, then discover what it cost. In Eden, humanity reaches for forbidden knowledge and loses access to the tree of life. In 1st Enoch, the Watchers spread forbidden knowledge and become connected with violence, corruption, and judgment. Knowledge itself is not presented as evil. Scripture repeatedly praises wisdom. The problem is rebellion, taking apart what God has ordered, reaching for what has not been given, using power without faithfulness. That is why Enoch's strange world is filled with assigned places. The sun has a course, the winds have storehouses, angelic beings have duties, judgment has appointed regions, even chaos has limits placed around it. Creation works because God has ordered it. The Watchers become terrifying because they reject their appointed order. And now the cherubim at Eden begin to carry even greater weight. Genesis says they guard the way to the tree of life. That is their task. They do not abandon it. They do not hand humanity the fruit. They do not decide that God's boundary no longer matters. They remain where God places them. The rebellious Watchers in 1st Enoch do the opposite. That contrast is striking. Faithful heavenly beings guard a boundary around life. Rebellious heavenly beings cross their own boundary and spread corruption. And humanity stands in the middle of the story. But Enoch sees one more kind of place, a place connected with the dead. During his journey, he comes to a great mountain and sees hollow places within it. He asks why they exist. The angel Raphael explains that these places have been made for the spirits of the dead until the time of judgment. The sections are separated. The righteous are not simply mixed together with those awaiting punishment. Once again, the Enochic writer imagines order, separation, waiting. Judgment has not yet reached its final moment, but nothing has been forgotten. This theme runs through the book. The Watchers may believe their acts changed the world forever. Violence may seem out of control. Human cries may rise from the earth. Yet heaven sees, heaven records, heaven judges. That is why Enoch matters so much inside the story. He is a scribe. He sees what humanity cannot normally see. He carries messages. He records judgment. He becomes a witness that the visible world does not contain the whole story. And perhaps this is the most important link to Eden. After Adam and Eve are expelled, they can see only one side of the boundary. The garden is closed to them. The cherubim guard the way. Humanity lives east of Eden. Work becomes painful. Death becomes part of the human story. Then Genesis follows generations of people who live outside the garden. Cain, Abel, Seth, their descendants. Cities rise. Tools are made. Music appears. Violence spreads. And eventually, the human world becomes so corrupt that the flood story begins. Genesis tells that history from the ground. 1st Enoch imagines part of that same pre-flood crisis from above. Genesis shows human wickedness increasing. Enoch adds the rebellion of Watchers. Genesis says the earth became filled with violence. Enoch builds a detailed ancient explanation around how cosmic rebellion helped deepen that disorder. These are not two texts saying exactly the same thing, but the Enochic tradition is clearly wrestling with the world of Genesis 6 and the question of how creation moved from Eden to the violence before Noah. The Qumran archive itself describes the Enochic fallen angel material as a story hinted at in Genesis 6, 1-4. That question is easy to overlook. Genesis chapter 1 ends with creation called very good. Genesis chapter 2 gives the garden. By Genesis chapter 6, the earth is filled with such evil that the flood is near. How did the story fall so far? Genesis places human sin at the center. Cain murders Abel. Lamech boasts of violence. Human wickedness grows. First Enoch does not erase human guilt, but it widens the crisis. It presents rebellious heavenly beings as corrupting forces in the pre-flood world. And this is what Enoch claimed existed in the larger creation beyond the familiar human story. Not hidden advanced nations, not another race of atoms, not secret cities waiting outside Eden's gate. The surviving Enochic text does not give solid ground for those claims. What it gives is stranger. A creation filled with regions humanity does not control. Heavenly beings with assigned purposes, places of confinement, places of judgment, mountains connected with divine mysteries, a garden in the east, a tree connected with life, and boundaries that matter. Suddenly, the loss of Eden becomes more than losing a beautiful home. Humanity has been removed from a sacred place within God's ordered creation. The gate is guarded because access to life matters. The cherubim stand because God's boundary matters. And the stories that follow show what happens when both humans and heavenly rebels treat divine limits as if they mean nothing. But there is still one final surprise. In Genesis, the tree of life disappears from human reach after Eden, yet it does not disappear from the biblical story. Near the end of Revelation, it returns. The tree of life stands within God's restored city. Its fruit is present. Its leaves are connected with the healing of the nations, and the curse is removed. The first chapters of Scripture show humanity driven away from the tree. The final chapters show God's servants in restored fellowship with Him. That is the larger biblical hope. First Enoch's ancient visions are not required to understand that promise, but they reveal how at least some ancient Jewish readers imagined the world between Eden and judgment. They saw creation as layered, ordered, alive with heavenly activity. They believed rebellion had consequences far beyond one moment. And they believed God had set boundaries evil could not cross forever. So what did Enoch claim existed beyond Eden? The most careful answer is not a secret civilization. It is not proof that Adam and Eve met the Watchers the moment they left the garden. It is something far more unsettling. A vast, created order. A world where the visible and heavenly stories were connected, where rebellious powers could face chains, where the dead awaited judgment, where mountains and valleys marked terrifying purposes, where Eden still had a place, and where every boundary pointed to the same truth. The garden was never the whole world. It was the place humanity lost within a creation far bigger than humanity ever understood.